Mercedes-Benz. One of the oldest, flashiest, most luxurious car brands on the planet, worth somewhere in the neighborhood of $80 billion. But when you're staring at that three-pointed star sitting on the hood of a car that costs more than most people's houses, it's easy to forget how humble the beginning actually was. This whole thing started with a broke engineer who swallowed more doubt and more failure than any one man should have to, all while chasing a single stubborn idea, a carriage that didn't need a horse. Plenty of folks figured he'd lost his mind. He proved every last one of them wrong and turned his little operation into the world's first and biggest production car company back in the late 1800s. But here's the thing. What starts out as one of the great underdog stories takes a hard left turn into genuinely dark territory. Because down the road, this company cashed in on building military vehicles for the Nazis and did it on the backs of forced laborers. So sit back and get comfortable, because today we're digging into the insane story of Mercedes-Benz and the man who gave the automobile a pulse, Carl Benz. Carl Benz was born in November of 1844 in the German town of Mühlberg. His family didn't have two nickels to rub together. His father drove locomotives and just barely kept food on the table. Then, when Carl was 2 years old, his father died, and suddenly it was just him and his mom, staring down real financial trouble. So no, Carl's childhood was not easy. But even living in poverty, even going to bed with his stomach growling, his mother moved heaven and earth to make sure that boy got an education. Because of her, Carl got into school, and it didn't take long for the teachers to notice something special, especially when it came to chemistry and mechanics. By the time he was 15, Carl decided to follow his old man into the world of machines, and he passed the entrance exam for mechanical engineering at the University of Karlsruhe. That's where he crossed paths with a teacher who would end up shaping his entire life, Ferdinand Rechtenbacher. Rechtenbacher is the guy credited with bragging mechanical engineering in Germany out of the workshop and turning it into a real technical science. He was also convinced that steam engines, which back then were mostly powering railways and boats, were living on borrowed time. Under his teaching, Carl's fascination with horseless carriages really caught fire. And since Carl rode a bicycle everywhere anyway, he started messing around with his own bike, poking at it, experimenting, hunting for some way to make a vehicle move under its own power. Now, plenty of engineers and inventors had already taken a swing at building the first automobile. A handful had even gotten self-propelled machines to actually move. Problem was, none of them were what you'd call practical. Carl noticed something. Almost every one of those early attempts was built on steam engine technology, and with Rechtenbacher pointing the way, it hit him. This needed a completely different concept. People laughed right in his face when he described the vision. He didn't care. He knew it could be done. He just needed time to prove it. So after graduating from Karlsruhe at 19, Carl spent the next 7 years bouncing through a string of engineering and construction jobs, never quite fitting in anywhere. But he was soaking up everything, and in 1871 he used all of it to start something of his own. At 27, Carl teamed up with a mechanic named August Ritter, and the two of them opened an iron foundry and mechanical workshop in Mannheim. All the while, Carl was still burning the midnight oil on his side project, that motorized carriage. So having a partner to help run the day-to-day felt like a no-brainer. Unfortunately for Carl, his business partner turned out to be a flake, and once the local authorities hauled off their tools, the company limped through its first year on fumes. Lucky for Carl, that same stretch of time is when he met a woman named Bertha Ringer, who would become his wife a few years down the road. Bertha came from money, but more importantly, she came with a spine. She couldn't stomach watching her fiancé's sweat and brains go down the drain because of his deadbeat partner, so she made a call. She used her own dowry to buy out every last share Ritter held in the company. Just like that, Carl and Bertha owned the whole thing outright. Together, they dragged the business back from the brink and kept the lights on for the next 10 years. And here's the thing. All that struggle is exactly when Carl's genius started showing. On the side, in the margins of a business that was barely breathing, he was cooking up breakthrough after breakthrough. The headliner? A gasoline two-stroke engine in 1879. He also started patenting his ideas to bring in extra cash, and the list reads like a modern car's greatest hits. An engine speed regulation system, battery-powered ignition, the spark plug, the carburetor, the clutch, the gear shift, a water radiator. Every one of those designs nudged him closer to his dream of a horseless carriage, and every one gave him something new to sell. But the money still wasn't there. Production costs at Carl's shop had ballooned so badly that the bank stepped in and demanded the company be incorporated. That meant taking on outside investors, and by 1882, his business had been turned into a joint stock company. When the dust settled, Carl was holding a whopping 5% of his own company. He got demoted from his own position. And the real gut punch? Nobody wanted his ideas anymore. When the company designed new products, his opinion didn't even make it into the room. He had zero say in the place he built. Frustrated, stung, and done being a bystander, Carl boxed up his things and walked out the following year. Losing his company hurt, no question, but the sting lit a fire under him. His lifelong love of bicycles led him to Max Rose and Friedrich Wilhelm, two guys running a bicycle repair shop in Mannheim. Together they founded Benz & C, building industrial machines and stationary gas engines. Unlike Carl's last rodeo, this one took off. It turned profitable fast, and with steady money coming in and a crew of 25 people on the floor, Benz finally aimed his attention at the dream he'd been chasing his whole life, building an automobile around his gas engine. And here's the twist that made all the difference. Instead of bolting a motor onto a carriage, Carl built the carriage around the motor, borrowing tricks from bicycle technology. What came out in 1885 is what a lot of folks call the first true automobile. The Benz patent motor wagon. A two-seater rolling on three-wire wheels like a tricycle, powered by a gasoline four-stroke motor. That single cylinder cranked out 2/3 of a horsepower and could hit about 7 miles an hour. Benz knew he had something revolutionary on his hands, and after plenty of testing and tinkering, he rolled his wonder car out in public in the summer of 1886. The reaction? Mixed, to put it kindly. A few people were blown away, but most eyeballed the thing with pure suspicion, and plenty of them didn't want him driving it down the main streets at all, convinced the contraption was going to blow up. Others were even convinced that Benz was the devil himself, joyriding around in some infernal carriage. And Carl's business partners? They weren't exactly popping champagne either. His obsession with the automobile pulled him away from the work that actually paid the bills. And for the life of them, they couldn't see the point of the thing. Who on earth would buy this contraption, they argued. It's no faster than a horse. It breaks down if you look at it funny, and it runs out of fuel. Carl didn't budge. He was dead certain his horseless carriage was the future, and in 1888, he started building cars to sell. The first person on the planet to do it. His biggest cheerleader was his wife, who'd spend hours in the workshop right alongside him, tossing out ideas and suggestions. But even with every improvement they bolted on, the world still couldn't see what Carl saw. And the handful of folks who did buy a car could only putter around the block with it, and even then they needed a mechanic riding shotgun at all times. Didn't help that these things cost a fortune, which put them strictly in rich and fancy territory. And plenty of those rich, fancy people wanted nothing to do with them. Because they were loud, they were filthy, they were a whole scene. So one thing was crystal clear. Carl had to convince the world that the automobile was here to stay. One morning in the summer of 1888, Bertha Benz got up before the roosters, while Carl was still snoring away, climbed into her husband's car, and set off on one of the most important road trips in automotive history. She loaded up her two sons and pointed the thing toward her mother's place in Pforzheim, 66 miles from Mannheim. She didn't tell her husband. She didn't tell the police. Probably because if either of them had gotten wind of it, she'd have been going nowhere. Keep in mind, no car, no motorized carriage, nothing had ever attempted a haul that long. But she was determined to prove her husband's invention mattered. And let me tell you, this was no Sunday drive. Bertha ran into one headache after another. Dusty, rocky roads built for hooves, not wheels. A pit stop at a pharmacy to buy more fuel, and a few roadside repairs she handled herself. That 66-mile trip took Bertha and her boys over 12 hours, but they rolled into Pforzheim safe and sound. And more than anything, it did exactly what she'd set out to do. It got people to notice that the automobile was the next big thing. Suddenly, the Benz Motorwagen was the talk of the town, and Carl's business got publicity money couldn't buy. Before long, Benz & C was growing fast. So fast that by 1890 it was the second largest engine manufacturer in all of Germany. Though not from selling cars, mind you, but from their stationary gasoline engines. Then two new business partners came aboard, Friedrich von Fischer and Julius Ganz, and they'd help flip that script. With those two handling the business and marketing end, Benz could put his head down on the engineering, and he patented a whole string of new automotive innovations. The planetary gear transmission, the double pivot steering, and the flat engine with a boxer configuration. He also designed and built a brand new, improved automobile at his partner's urging, and it hit the market in 1893. He called it the Benz Victoria. Fancier ride, 2 seats, a 3-horsepower engine that could get you up to a blistering 11 miles an hour. Because it was actually reliable, it sold pretty well. But it was the follow-up design, the cheaper Benz's Velo, on the other hand, really took off. Roughly 1,200 units rolled out the door, and just like that, the Benz Velo became the world's first large-scale production car in history. That one little machine made Benz & C the biggest automobile company on the planet through the 1890s and into the early 1900s. But here's the thing. While the Benz company was busy enjoying all that newfound success, it was also sweating bullets over another outfit sitting just down the road, Daimler Motorengesellschaft. Now, before we get to the next chapter, let me thank today's sponsor, the folks who made this video possible, Course Careers. If you're chasing a high-paying job in tech, but you've got no degree and zero experience, Course Careers has you covered. They're flipping the whole script on how people start their careers. Instead of dropping 4 years and a small fortune on college, you just knock out an affordable online course that teaches you everything you actually need to do the job. On top of that, Course Careers helps you land the gig because they partner with companies actively hunting for Course Careers grads to fill entry-level roles and internships. Go check out their student stories. People like Nyla, who went from pulling shots as a Starbucks barista to a 60,000 tech sales rep, or Dea, who finished the course in 2 weeks flat and now pulls in a 100,000 salary from a fully remote job. Head to coursecareers.com/bigcompany and jump into their free intro course so you can see exactly how to break into tech without a degree or any experience. Use code BIGCOMPANY50 and knock $50 off your first course. Alright, back to the story. Daimler Motorengesellschaft was run by Gottlieb Daimler and Wilhelm Maybach. Both were brilliant engineers, but Gottlieb Daimler in particular was a fierce competitor, and he had the connections and the business smarts that Carl Benz, frankly, just didn't have. The first Daimler car sold commercially showed up in 1892. 2 years later, they followed it up with a two-cylinder model, and in 1897, they rolled out their first front-engine car, the Daimler Phoenix. The writing was on the wall. Daimler was closing the gap on Benz fast, and their vehicles looked better and rode a whole lot more comfortably in the eyes of the public. Sadly, Mr. Daimler passed away in 1900, leaving Maybach at the helm. But it was under Maybach's watch that he designed his crowning achievement, the Mercedes 35 horsepower in 1901. So what makes this thing so special? It was the first automobile that actually looks like what you and I picture when we hear the word car. It packed a powerful gas engine. The body was wider and bigger, built on a tailored steel chassis, and the center of mass sat low, right down near the ground. It was built for racing first, made at the request of a wealthy businessman named Emil Jelinek, who decided to name the car after his daughter, Mercedes. And that car went on to clean up, winning street races and hill climb events left and right, hitting a top speed of 56 miles an hour, which blew the doors off anything else on the road at the time. All that attention convinced the Daimler company to rebrand every vehicle they made as Mercedes. And they started cranking out new models for racing and for the public under that same name. On the flip side, this whole new trend did not sit well with Carl Benz's partners, who wanted an answer to the competition, and they wanted it yesterday. So they brought in a few French designers to help cook up a new, faster model, and they did it without Carl's approval. Benz was angry, he was hurt, and he was having none of it. He never liked the idea of auto racing, and he'd always rather putter along nice and slow, both hands on the wheel. The noise, the danger, some maniac tearing down a public road at full tilt, it made his skin crawl. And the car his team put together didn't exactly set the world on fire either, which was bad news for the Benz company, already limping through one crisis after another between 1903 and 1904. Fed up and heartsick, Carl walked away from his own company, though he kept his seat on the board of directors. And here's the kicker. He finally caved and let his cars race, and it was those very racing wins that pulled the company back from the brink. By 1908, Benz had a 120 horsepower racer on its hands, a genuine monster that thundered from Leningrad to Moscow in 8.5 hours, averaging 50 miles an hour. Doesn't sound like much today, but keep in mind the roads back then were barely more than glorified cow paths. That was flat out astonishing. But the car that really made the world sit up and stare was the 200 horsepower Blitzen Benz. Built in 1909, this thing shattered the absolute speed record for anything that moved, plane, train, or automobile, blasting past 140 miles an hour in 1911. Just like that, Benz stood shoulder to shoulder with Daimler as one of the most drooled-over cars money could buy. And both outfits were selling like hotcakes in the years that followed. Then the party ended. World War I broke out and turned everybody's life upside down, along with the entire global economy. Germany lost. The country slid into a brutal recession, and both Daimler and Benz found themselves fighting just to keep the lights on. So the two old rivals swallowed their pride. In 1924, they signed a deal to pool their production and marketing while keeping their own names on the badge, all in the name of cutting costs. That truce lasted a whole 2 years. The German economy kept sliding, and in 1926, the two companies had no choice but to merge lock, stock, and barrel, creating a brand new outfit called Daimler-Benz. Under Daimler-Benz, the cars were rebranded as Mercedes-Benz, and the late 1920s brought some real showstoppers, like the Mercedes-Benz Type 630 and the S, SS, and SSK. And one of the sharpest engineers behind those machines? A fellow named Ferdinand Porsche. Yeah, that name would go on to ring a few bells in the car business. As for Karl, he stayed on the Daimler-Benz board and got to watch his automobiles take over the world, sitting back and marveling at just how far the whole industry had traveled in one man's lifetime. He passed away just a few short years after the merger, in April 1929, at the age of 84. After he was gone, the company only got bigger and stronger, muscling its way into the ranks of the finest performance car makers on Earth. But some of its greatest years came under the most uncomfortable patronage imaginable. When Hitler took power in Germany in 1933, he wanted to parade German engineering and technology in front of the whole world, hoping it would make him look bigger than the leaders around him. One of his chosen showcases was international motorsport. Almost overnight, he was writing fat subsidy checks to Daimler-Benz to get them into Grand Prix racing. And nobody, and I mean nobody in that era poured as much time, money, and obsession into building fast cars as Daimler-Benz did. You could see it on the racetrack, plain as day. From 1934 to 1939, Mercedes owned Grand Prix racing, hitting speeds around 200 miles an hour with the W25 and W125. But they weren't running unopposed. A brand new rival was about to come knocking. Auto Union, another German automaker with its own country writing the checks, grabbed a big slice of the glory in that same stretch, racking up 25 wins between 1935 and 1937. Those wins put Germany on top of the motorsports world, and Mercedes-Benz sat right at the peak of it. So much so that Mercedes became Hitler's brand of choice. One of the cars he turned up in over and over was the Mercedes-Benz 770, a big, heavy piece of luxury hardware that mostly hauled around high-ranking Nazi politicians and other Axis officials. Then 1939 hit, the Second World War kicked off, and Daimler-Benz found itself standing on very thin ice. Demand for civilian passenger cars dried up fast, so the company pivoted hard. Military vehicles, submarines, tanks, aircraft engines, all of it for the Nazi military. Their bread and butter, though, was military trucks, the kind built to move 3 to 6.5 tons of supplies at a time. By 1942, public cars were off the table completely. Every last resource went into the war effort. And as the war got bigger, so did the appetite for armaments, which meant Daimler-Benz needed more hands on deck. Problem was, the entire workforce had been shipped off to the front lines. So the company started recruiting women just to hit the unit numbers it was being told to hit. Still not enough. So Daimler-Benz turned to forced labor. Prisoners of war, civilians who had been snatched off the street, and detainees pulled out of concentration camps were housed right next to the plants and worked brutal hours under constant pressure from the Germans. Most of them came from Eastern Europe and were penned into barrack camps that were prisons in everything but name, while the concentration camp detainees were watched over by the SS in conditions you can only call inhumane. A lot of people died in those camps, from severe malnutrition, from mistreatment, from outright torture. By 1944, close to half of Daimler-Benz's 63,000 employees were forced laborers. Then the war ended in 1945, and the bill came due. Under the Potsdam Agreement, every German asset held abroad was confiscated and put toward reparations. For Daimler-Benz, that meant kissing goodbye to all of its foreign subsidiaries, affiliates, and branches. Stripped back to nothing but the plants on home soil. In plain English, they were starting from scratch and had to rebuild the whole thing brick by brick. Daimler-Benz got restructured, and top management had to be denazified. Because of those drastic changes, the company managed to pull a production permit out of the American occupation authorities in 1946. Their factory had taken serious bomb damage, sure, but Mercedes-Benz still had one big card in hand. It owned its plant. Plenty of competitors, BMW and Adler among them, watched their sites disappear into Soviet territory. So Mercedes-Benz put its energy into ambulances, police patrol vehicles, and delivery vans built off the 170V, and turned one of its plants into a repair shop for U.S. military transports. By 1947, passenger cars were back on the line, though just 1,045 of those 170V models rolled out that entire year. Not exactly a gold rush. And yet, even under those far from ideal conditions, Daimler-Benz was turning a profit 1 year later. By the 1950s, Mercedes-Benz had clawed back most of its influence, came roaring back in motorsports, and was moving cars all over the world. So much so that by 1954, the company had already profited over $1 billion. That's what it's worth today. And over the years, Mercedes completely flipped its image and clawed its way up to become one of the most valuable car brands on the planet. But here's the thing. None of it, not one bit, would have happened without Carl Benz. A guy with no money, no connections, no safety net, just a stubborn streak a mile wide, and a bunch of critics telling him to give it up. He had the guts and the grit to drag that dream out of his head and put it on the road. Thanks for hanging out with me, folks. Hope you got a kick out of it. Do me a favor, smash that like button and subscribe. Until next time, I'll catch you in the next one.